Time to paint! Brushes. We don't use watercolor brushes, we use brushes for acrylic. There's natural bristle. They're really that scratchy, crinkly stuff. Pretty rough for good brush work. Having a lot of fun. And there's Sabline. There's natural and synthetic, very soft and smooth. All kinds of brushes. We have the liner brush for nice long lines. And we have the flat and the bright. It's funny because the difference is actually just the length of the bristles. The flat has longer and the bright is shorter. Then we have filbert. Filbert looks like a flat brush that got a haircut. So that's my favorite. Then we have the round brush, which has the round ferrule. So we have the handle, that's the plastic part, and then the ferrule is the metal, and there's the round bristles. And then we have the angular shader. So that is usually like a flat brush that has another haircut that has an angle. And then sometimes you don't know what it is. It could be a flat, it could be a bright. We don't know. I show you all these brushes so that you know what to grab for. You may not have them in your kit, but that's okay. We'll move on. So we have palette knives, offset spatula, the palette painter's knife. You can use them for mixing paint, applying paint. Here's another one coming that is not offset. It's just a flat one. As long as they're flexible, you're good to go. So those are for mixing and painting. Now we have paint. So this is an acrylic paint. It's called a crafts paint. It's actually used a lot more for, well, crafts. It's more liquidy and in this kind of a container. When you pour it out, it's actually going to come out pretty fluid. Craft acrylic paint is good paint. It's used a lot in painting on wood or on glass or on any kind of crafts, but it is self-leveling. So when you pour it out, it has a very smooth, creamy texture, and it will kind of puddle into anything that you're pouring it onto. In our studio, we use the fine art acrylic, actually by Crayola's portfolio series. So that's in our studio. We also use a Blick acrylic. And with this acrylic, it tends to be pretty thick. It has a high viscosity, not as high as some other ones, but these are student grade. So here's the Blick acrylic. It comes in a different kind of container. Some other acrylic paints that you can see in the store is Liquitex Basics. That's another student grade quality paint by Liquitex. Here's one of Liquitex paints. And this is a pretty good thick artist quality paint. Another one would be the Academy Acrylic by Grumbacher. Another brand I don't actually have a tube of right now is called Golden. So Golden Acrylics, there's a label for you to know. So let's talk mediums. So we have here a gel gloss. It's a acrylic gel medium. It's basically acrylic without the color. You do a lot of really cool techniques with this for glazing. You can even use the matte. There's gloss, there's matte, there's all kinds of different mediums. Some of them even have sand worked into them, and there's texture paste. Mediums go forever and ever. Here I also have the slow dry retarder. So this actually slows the drying time of acrylic. Some people like oil, but they want a convenience of acrylic, and this will help you there. You don't have those in your kit, but they're good to know about. Palettes. Let's go over what you don't want to do. You don't want to use paper. Paper is very absorbent. So is wood. This is like the quintessential artist palette, but it absorbs a lot of the moisture from your paint and everything will dry out. So paper is no good and the wood is no good. Even paper plates are not the greatest unless they are like the waxy coated kind. So these actually aren't too bad. So at home you can use the waxy coated paper plates and then go ahead and cover that with a saran wrap if you have that at home so that you can keep your paints from one day to the next. If you happen to have one of these well palettes at home, maybe someone got this for you at some point, make sure you clean it out. Don't let your kids use it and then leave it like that. That stinks. Another thing that you could use is an old color pencil container. I like to keep these and use them as palettes. They're like perfect for lidded palettes. So at the end of the day, I just give everything maybe a little spray, put a little damp paper towel in the corner, and close it up and it keeps everything nice and fresh. The other thing that you could use is something called a paper palette. So here it is, and if you open it up, it's just like a pad of paper palette. You've seen this in the studio. It's like wax paper. So another really good thing to use if you have it at home is just plain old wax paper. If you happen to have that, ask of course, and you can use that. Let's paint. I know what you're thinking, finally. Well, here I have some paint squirted onto my temporary coated palette, and you can probably even tell now how thick this paint is compared to that other blue paint that I showed you in the beginning of the video. It keeps that texture. When you squirt it out, it kind of keeps that dollop look. I'm actually going to add a little bit more yellow here for my mixing purposes for the video. I'm not going to pour all the paints out how I would normally do if I was painting a full painting. I'm just going to use a couple colors for now. I might add some as I'm painting. Usually I put the whole kind of rainbow along the edges of whatever it is that I'm using, so I have room to groove in the middle. And I'm going to use this palette knife. It's an offset spatula, and I'm going to mix. I like to use the thinner part of the palette knife if that's what I'm using. So when you're mixing paint, the biggest thing is always add your dark to your light. You never want to add your light to your dark, because then you'll be just like using so much of the light color to fight that dark color, and it's just going to waste paint and waste your time. So you're always going to put a little bit into your lighter color and mix it around. Some people like to just kind of stir. You're going to be there forever. So I like to just kind of like scoop up and then smoosh down. It's very technical. Why do we use a palette knife to mix our paint? Well, if we use a brush, we're going to actually kind of ruin those bristles of the brush. Some of our blue might hide down in there in the root as we're mixing our green, so to speak. And then as we're painting, we might get a streak of blue in our green. And sometimes that's okay, but some people don't like it. Techniques. So you know how to mix the paint? Well, what are you going to do with it? Look at that. So for your technique practice, you're actually going to use your canvas paper. I have to use regular paper, but I want you to use your canvas paper because it's going to accept the paint better. But because we're in the remote learning setting, you're actually going to be doing a smaller version of this. And since you don't have the gel medium, you can't do the glaze technique, which is okay. We'll get through it. But everything else is good to go. So you're going to be doing half the size here. So take your canvas paper, I'm using computer paper, fold it in half, and make sure that you have it even. You're going to have to press pretty well because it is canvas paper, but fold it in half, and you're going to cut there, ta-da! And take one, and you're going to fold that in half the other way, then in quarters, and you have 8 sections. Instead of writing the words on the front, you're just going to write them on the back. The other paper will be for the next exercise. Filbert's going to help me focus here because I'm zoomed in on my paper. I think it's as good as it's going to get. I'm going to use this marker to write down the technique that I'm going to do for each section. Yeah, that looks like we can read it. Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm doing my best. So I'm going to show you blending. The biggest thing about blending that I can say for anyone is always to mix some of the parts, meaning if you want to go from yellow to blue, then you should have a green that is pre-mixed. The other thing with blending is to work quickly and work wet into wet. Let's not forget that I am working on paper here, so it's not going to be super perfect, but we're going to do our best. So in between the colors, I am washing my brush, and then I'm going to lay them down very quickly. So I lay down my yellow, green, and blue, and then I'm going to clean my brush again and then blend, work yellow into green, and then the green into the blue. You don't want to travel too far back up. That's the trick. A lot of times people go way back up and it just taints the yellow. Dry brush is our next one. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. Usually I put down the first coat and I forgot. So I'm just going to quickly lay down some red here. and just kind of flat paint and get this on here. And I'm noticing that I am running out of paint, and I can probably still show you dry brush without putting a first coat. So let's have some fun and do some red dry brush too. So I'm just going to squiggle it around out of sight because, yeah, I didn't know it was off camera. But I'm luckily going to put some here too. And there's dry brush. I'll probably show you a little bit more dry brush later. Scumbling. I did the same thing. So usually I put a flat coat. Here's a flat coat of scumbling. I'm going to put down some orange, and that way I can do my scumbling technique later. These will dry while I'm working on other techniques, probably quickly, because again, I'm just working on plain paper. For the next technique, you're going to have to take like a pencil and just do some crisp edges. You could do a geometric design. I wouldn't make it too complicated. Kind of looks like a stick figure, kind of bending down, almost a dab. I'm going to get my marker here and I'm going to write clean edge, could be hard edge, flat edge, just a crisp, clean edge is what we're looking for. I have a few things, 3 things to remember. Number 1, always do light first. That way if you want to clean things up with the dark, you can do that. The other thing is you want to start in and then go up to your edge. So you start inside the area and go up to the edge, paint, and then pull away. A lot of times if people start at the edge, okay, then their brush is actually going to spread and then it's going to go over the edge. So again, load the paint, not too much. Start in, work up, pull, and then as you pull away, you're going to work inside the shape again. Okay, so it's work in, go up to the edge, pull for a little while, and then go back into the shape, and keep your paint nice and fluid. I'm going to use a different brush to show you now with a round brush. And I noticed I had a lot of paint, so what do you do when you load your round brush? A lot of times people like to do like a little twirl, little spin, and it gets a nice fluid amount of paint on there. I'm going to do my best when I am doing this edge. Keep in mind I have the iPad shooting down here, and to get that little corner, boy, I couldn't do it from afar. I was about 1.5 feet away, so I don't want to put my head in the camera. I think I better turn off the camera and fix this. Oh, there you go. Oh, see, I thought I could do it. Nice, crisp, clean edge. I only got through my yellow and blue, and scumbling and dry brush first layers were ready for me, so let's do this. I'm going to take any kind of a flat brush, and I'm going to lay the side of the brush onto the paint. So kind of just like dab up and down, just let it slightly grab some of that thick paint. And then I'm going to lay the brush almost parallel to the canvas or to the paper and let it kind of drag. That's scumbling. Scumbling is really useful for like putting highlights on water in a painting, or just kind of adding some texture. So you let it just kind of graze and lay some thick and thin parts, very light pressure, almost none at all. So now I'm going to actually change brushes. I like to use bristle brushes for when I do dry brush, but you can use Sabeline, it's totally fine. But I was using that angular shader a lot, so I want to give this guy a shot. And I'm going to just rub the paint into the bristles, right? So it's not too much paint, and I'm going to let it just kind of dirty the bristle and then lightly drag and rub over that first layer. Dry brush also gives a lot of really cool texture. I just can't stop with that yellow. Just keep going and going. You can keep layering and it gets lighter. Moving on. So we are going to go over what I like to call the charged brush. Can't read that. So, yep, there we go. And I also want you to know that a lot of times this is also commonly referred to as like a painterly brushstroke. Okay, so instead of clean, crisp edges and, really planned out flat painting and blending, the charged brush is actually going to mix sometimes on the palette with the brush and allowing those colors to show through, or even mixing on the canvas, right? So I'm taking the yellow and I'm even just going to grab some of that blue and let what happens happens. I know that when I put the blue to the yellow, it's going to make green, and I can see all the different, mottled textures and a lot of paint on my brush. It's a really charged brush and painterly brushstroke. I'm not too worried about perfect mixing, perfect colors. When you think about artists like in the Impressionistic period, think of a Van Gogh with that really thick brushstroke. That's basically what we're looking for. Just not overdoing it though, because if you keep going and going, then you basically just mix green on your canvas. And we want to see all those really mottled textures. So here you go. Don't mind my mess to the side. I was cleaning my brush. Wait, do you see what I see? I need a marker. Happy accident, I looked down and saw a T-Rex. So I brought him to life. Roar. Okay, moving on. We're going to do the impasto technique. For this, you will need a palette knife. And you're going to be using a lot of paint for this, but oh no. Yeah, that's real nice. I can't. Nope. Try again. Don't mess up this time. Okay, so there we go, impasto. So the impasto technique is really thick. You need to use a lot of thick paint. And you're going to mix your colors off of the canvas or the paper and then apply it. You could also mix on, just like I'm doing here. So I'm going to not fully mix my colors on my palette, and then I'm going to apply them. See how thick and viscous the paint is? That's what I want. I want to be using a good amount of paint, but in a controlled way, right? So notice I'm trying to use a little bit more control with the green, and you are still trying to purposefully lay down specific colors that you want in some way or in some direction. Here I decided to add in some lighter tones and colors here so that I'm not always working with just intense primary. So I want to show you that you can kind of incorporate some lighter tints and some dabbing here. Impasto. All right, moving on. Next I have stippling. So stippling you probably already remember from when we were working with pen and ink. You're kind of up and down like a pointillism. With stippling, it is actually a technique that a lot of people recognize. Okay, so I will also say that when you lay it down, it's kind of like sponge. Like some people will paint with a sponge like up and down, or even stencil. So if a stencil brush or sponge technique, it's the same kind of like up and down motion. And the brushes that you would use, you can use all different kinds, but some of the popular ones are like the kind of Bob Ross house paint brush. And you just kind of like go up and down with them to get that really cool texture, and up and down like happy little trees. The other brush that you can use for this is actually a stencil brush. Stencil brushes look like just a big round thick brush with a buzz cut, just like bzz, like kind of like right off. You can also use other brushes, like just any brush that you have. So I have a bristle brush here. The biggest thing to know is like how you load it is how you're going to lay it. So you got to go up and down when you load it. And then it's just like an up and down motion. And if you go too much for too long, you are going to kind of omit some of that texture. For me, the biggest thing for developing depth when you're working with like the stippling texture with a bigger brush is to work with your darker color first. And then you should really let it dry in between a little bit, and then work with another lighter color, and then perhaps with another lighter color still. And by varying and not covering the whole thing, that's what's going to give you that depth and that texture. You could do stippling though with smaller brushes, with round brushes. So here I'm going to just kind of use a little round brush and do some dots for berries. Let's make this like a little berry bush. So you can go up and down with any kind of brush that would be stippling. There are a lot of painters out there like Sara who use a lot of dots like pointillism, and this is basically how you would get that technique done. All right, for sgraffito, I am actually going to use this bigger filbert brush, mostly because it's one of my favorites, but also because I want to lay down a lot of color really quickly so that I can work back into it for the sgraffito technique when the paint is still wet. Sgraffito is a really cool technique. It's actually used a lot in many different art materials, like in oil pastel and in clay. And the whole concept is you lay down a new skin, so to speak, and then while you can scratch away to reveal the old color that's underneath. With paint and with oil pastel, some of that color still shows through. So as you see here, it looks light blue instead of white. But the idea here is that you can use the other end of the brush and scratch away. Another really cool way to get texture. There you have it. There are all the techniques that we're going to go over in this unit. A lot of the colors that we worked with, or that I worked with for this, were pretty intense, but I think that they're good for the practice, but we need to go over color. But wait, there's more! So here we have our color wheel that's available to you on Google Classroom. If you can't print it, no problem. Just go ahead and draw out the wheel the best you can in your sketchbook. You will need to do this. So here we have the wheel, it goes around. I like this wheel because it includes all the different kinds of colors that you need to know for mixing the best variety of colors that you can. So at the top you'll see that it has an area for tints, that's a color mixed with white. Pure hue is pure color. The next is low intensity, which is when a color is mixed with its complement. Then tone, which is a color with gray. And then shade, which is a color with black. So hopefully this was a review for you from Art 1, but we don't want to forget about the color wheel. So in addition to having to do all this practice, you will need to create a wheel in your sketchbook.
Wow, you can really dance. Wow, you can really dance. He went. They said we've both been dancing all this time. What a coincidence.